Our first witness this morning is, wishes to be known as Sharon, does she?
That's right, sir.
Sharon Lowry.
Please state your full name.
Sharon Lowry.
And take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Sharon, you're here to talk about your late husband, Alan Richard Lowry, but known to everyone as Richard.
Yes.
And you and Richard met in 1983?
We did.
And when did you marry?
In July 84.
And Richard was a teacher?
He was. He was a teacher of economics, business studies. Previous years he taught geography. And he was head of sixth form in a grammar school and then became vice principal before he died.
Richard was, when he was well, physically a very imposing figure. He was some 6'7".
He was. He was a giant of a man.
And you've described him as your gentle giant.
He was. He was known by many. He was a true gentleman. He was described as a lot. And very quiet-spoken man and thought very highly of everybody. He treated everybody very well.
Now, Richard had mild haemophilia.
That's right.
And you've explained in your statement how your understanding is that he received cryoprecipitate on a number of occasions, 1969, 1970, 1972, and then factor VIII products in 1973 is your understanding from his medical records?
Yes, from notes I've seen, yes.
You've said in your statement, Sharon, that the risks of infection from factor products were not explained to Richard. Is that based upon the discussions you subsequently had with him?
We just always believed he was given these products. They were meant to help him with health, help him get better, whatever the problem was. There was never any issue over ever anything being wrong with the products, that he might become ill or, nothing like that was ever raised. You put your trust in what you're given, the doctors know what they're doing, so you don't question it.
And you have a memory of Richard finding out that he had been infected with hepatitis C. When do you think that was, and what can you tell us about what you recall?
My recollection is it was 1991. The reason being that, as a lot of people know, if you hear a piece of music that you really like, years later you will remember where you were when you heard that piece of music or who you were with. In my case, I remember our younger child only being a few months old. I remember the house we lived in where I was standing. The younger son was in one of these little chairs for a baby at my feet, and Richard coming in and blurting out what he'd been told. He'd just gone for a routine appointment, probably hematology clinic, and otherwise if I thought he was going to be told something like that, I would have been with him. But he was just stunned, and I think we both were, But I remember my child, the age, and even what he was wearing. I can still see it. I can still picture it as if Richard was standing with me now to tell me. So that stayed with me.
So that dates it to the first half of 1991 in your memory?
I would say yes, 91.
And what Richard said to you was he'd been told that he had hepatitis C?
Yes, non-A, non-B, and he really didn't know exactly what it was or what it meant, or he just was in shock, I think.
If we could just look at a document from Richard's medical records, Sharon, it's 2655002, and it's a letter dated the year after you're describing, 15th of April 1992. So there should be a first page of that, Paul. Thank you. So if we just look at this together, Sharon, we can see it's from Dr. Main to the GP. It talks about Richard being a mildly affecting haemophiliac. And then in the second paragraph, we can see that Dr. Main says this: Richard's problems over the years have almost exclusively been related to varying degrees of post-dental extraction bleeding. And she explains that she first saw him in 1969, treated with cryoprecipitate, and again in 1970 and 1972, and then requiring treatment again in 1977. And then if we go down to the next paragraph, please. She said this: any patient who received blood products has been exposed to the possibility of contracting viral infections during 1980s. This was particularly related to HIV infections. However, Mr. Lowry received no treatment during that period and all his tests are negative. However, he has had elevation of his liver enzymes for a number of years. This is related most likely to infections with hepatitis C virus. His results vary between 2 and 3 times the normal range of values. And then if we can have the next page, please. And then she goes on to say, his liver and spleen are both palpable, but he's otherwise well. Hepatitis C is an unknown quantity to some degree. Between 80 and 90% of treated haemophiliacs are known to be positive. All are clinically well. From liver biopsy specimens obtained in some centres, it would appear that a small percentage of patients may ultimately develop cirrhosis or chronic active hepatitis. And then she goes on to talk about the possibility of a trial of interferon treatment. Sharon, in those early years in the 1990s, and before we get to an occasion you remember when you and Richard both went to see Dr. Main together, can you recall what, if any, information Richard had received about the nature or seriousness of the hepatitis C infection?
I recall little or nothing, to be honest. We were left guessing and we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what way to look at it. He was worried. He didn't feel he was getting answers. He investigated life insurance. He was panicking. He didn't know what was going to happen. So we just felt ignorant, and we didn't feel the medical professionals knew anything about it either. We felt like everybody was blundering around not knowing what it meant or what the outcome might be or how it would affect people or how serious it would be. It was just, I don't think anybody, including a lot of medical people, even knew enough about it.
And you've said in your statement, it was suggested that if he was lucky, he might live for 10, maybe up to 20 years, but no other information was given to him at the time.
No, that was the one thing he'd been told that he came out with when he heard. And that's why I think he panicked, because he immediately, we'd just had our second child a short time, and we were in sort of the honeymoon period of enjoying life, our first house, or, our having kids, because we'd never taken that for granted. There'd been issues with that with me previously in losing a child. So we were really happy. And I think from that day on, that takes that happiness out of your life. You become more serious when you have that pressure, something cloud like that hanging over you, and you don't know what the future holds, and you have young children to think of. So he was panicking, trying to see if he could get life insurance. And back then, when there wasn't very much known about it, majority of people just said, no, we're not giving you life insurance. Now, eventually he did get a small policy, but paid so much per month. Afterwards, he wondered, was it worth it? Because he might have been just better trying to put that money in the bank. He felt he was being ripped off. So,
and one of the things you've said in your statement, Sharon, about the impact that even this early news had on your and Richard's life is it affected the decisions that you would make, even as to whether to have more children, because originally you'd thought of having a bigger family.
Yes, we wanted more children. We'd already lost one baby, and then we had the 2 boys, and I'm one of 4. He was one of 3, and we were keen to have more children. But you're left thinking, do we, don't we? What happens? The doctors don't know what happens 5 years down the line. Would he still be there, or would he be ill? Would we pass this on to our children in any way? So we sort of put life on hold for a few years, and then you tried to shut down on it because you're not learning anything. You tried to get on with it with your kids. You can't let it affect how you manage your family life, and you've got small children, which is probably it's a good leveler, having small children. Maybe stops you dwelling too much on things. And then eventually I did become pregnant again, but unfortunately then I lost that child too. So after that we decided we couldn't take any more pressure. It was too much.
Yes, you've said this in your statement. After that, the loss of the child in the other pregnancy, we couldn't take any more devastating news.
No, we just couldn't live with it.
Now, there was a time after the initial diagnosis, that you went to the hospital with Richard to the haemophilia centre and saw Dr. Main. What can you recall about that?
I just recalled as almost like a formal invitation for both of us to come so Dr. Main could have a proper discussion with us as regards our worries about hepatitis C, or give us guidance or information or something. I couldn't remember what year until I saw his medical notes and saw it wasn't until 1995 that happened. I was quite shocked when I saw that. And she had a discussion with us regarding, at the time, there was no mention of me being tested, but I was aware of a cousin of Richard's. I had heard through the grapevine that when it came up with his medical issues, whatever, that his wife and children had all been brought into a hospital. They were in England at the time, had been immediately asked to come in to get tested, and I was aware of this in the back of my mind. But the whole time we were having a discussion whether there was nothing like that suggested. I was quite in awe of Dr. May, and we thought very highly of her. So I sort of plucked up the courage eventually before we were due to leave and asked, was there any chance that I would be infected? And the response, I was quite shocked. She seems rather amused. I felt a bit like a silly child asking. But I said I was concerned that I was infected. So she sort of pawed that suggestion. But then eventually, whether I gave her food for thought or whatever, it was suggested to me then to give a blood sample, get tested. And I can't remember if that happened at the hospital or I had to go to my doctor the next day. But the results seemed to be rushed through, and I do remember that she called me herself. She phoned me to say that I was fine.
And it's right, I should point out that Dr. Main in her statement has said she's no recollection of the conversation you describe or of laughing. And she does say that she had progressive hearing problems from 1993 onwards and may have misheard what was being asked. She doesn't recall telephoning you in relation to the test. But we have got a record which makes some reference to you being tested. It's 2655003. And this is May the 9th, 1995. I think this is how you've been able to date the conversation that you've been talking about to 1995. And we can see it says here, I write to you regarding the above. Richard and his wife attended the haemophilia clinic on the 20th of April 1995 for a full discussion and review regarding hepatitis C infection. I went over the historical background to the disorder, and we estimated that the most likely year when Richard was infected was 1977, although it could have been earlier in 1969 or 1970. Liver function testing was not undertaken on a regular basis until 1990, and the results have ranged from 99 units to as high as 178 units in August 1993. And then she goes on in this next paragraph to deal with the possibility of transmission to wives or partners, and says it was a very low priority. Very few patients' wives or partners have been found to be positive. In fact, no female partner has yet tested positive in Northern Ireland. And then says this, I wrote to Richard and his wife today, having already indicated the results of testing by telephone, which revealed, as expected, that Mrs. Lowry was negative. And then she sets out the plan to carry out liver function tests for Richard on a regular basis.
I think my thoughts at the time were the response when I asked if there was a possibility of me being infected was a case of her response was, well, it hasn't happened yet, so why would it happen now? And that shocked me. It's the expression of after the horses bolted and the stable doors shut. I can't even get my head around that, even that expression. But at the time, it was just that idea that, well, it hasn't happened yet, so why, or, would it be likely? And that's why I felt I was made to feel a bit stupid at the time. But since that's been proven that I was right to be asked to get tested.
Now, how did the hepatitis C infection impact on Richard's health over the following years, so the remainder of the 1990s and the first part of the 2000s?
He gradually, as has been said by a lot of people, so many symptoms, shivers, desperate tiredness. He had aching joints, feeling sick, flu-like symptoms. He struggled continually with work. He tried to keep going. He had some spells maybe would ease, other spells that wouldn't. he had various treatments with interferon and other things, but he found these did not agree with him. They actually made him feel more ill. He didn't want to say too much and risk his job, so you have to be careful of what you say in work. So he just pushed on as best he could, but when he came home then from work, he would spend most time lying down. He wasn't up to maybe being the fun father with his sons that he would like to have been. It is such a knock-on effect. And
there were a number of occasions when he had some kind of memory lapses. Could you tell us about those?
Yes. One of them was quite early on, was just before he was mentioned of hepatitis C at the time, and I got a call from school. And at that time, I was at home with the children. I'd taken a break from work, just to say they were very worried. He was very confused, and it was distressing him. And for me to come get him, he had quite a bad episode then. He had another one sometime later. There's a date in his notes. I can't remember now what it was. He had to be admitted to hospital, and this scared him because he knew that this can be related to the hepatitis C virus. The chances of this happening are quite high. And he'd had 2 or 3 episodes over some time. They kept him in on one occasion for several days and tested him. But nobody could say if it was connected or not. You know, they just didn't know at the time.
And you've dated one of those episodes, the one that resulted in him being admitted to the Ulster Hospital, as the 10th of January 1995, looking at his records.
Yes.
Did you and Richard tell people generally about the infection with hepatitis C, or did you keep it to yourselves and family members?
No, I think even from the early years, even just haemophilia, you don't advertise the fact if you've got haemophilia, because people, not so much their ignorance, they just don't know of it. They don't recognise what it is, the stigma attached. He used to be involved with the Haemophilia Society, and we used to help with collection days, arranging collection days. And even then, we would get some verbal comments from people. They considered haemophilia, what was that? Was it something to do with HIV or drugs or something that wasn't clean? And that was quite upsetting. So when he developed Hep C virus, he certainly wasn't going to advertise that. He was just in this teaching job 2 or 3 years. He didn't want any knockbacks from Education Authority or anyone else because of people's misconceptions or not knowing about it. So you keep quiet about it. You don't want it to affect your lifestyle and how people look at you. And unfortunately, just because people don't know enough about and haemophilia, hepatitis C, anything like that, they're inclined to think maybe the wrong thoughts, or there is a stigma there that you have to live with. You have to try and work with that.
In 2004, Richard received a copy of a letter which we've seen in relation to other witnesses about VCJD. Can you recall anything about the impact of that?
To be honest, I was shocked when I saw that in his notes. I didn't remember anything about it, and I wasn't aware that he had received that letter. And I think in his notes there's a letter written to his doctor about that, saying that Mr. Lowry has not come to be tested or checked. And that's what made me query if we'd ever received the letter in the first place, because it's something we would have gone to together. And he needed my support as time went on, and he became feeling very unwell. We would have gone to appointments together and shared things, and he would have talked things through with me, or if something worrying, and he felt also responsibility to keep me aware of things. So I was shocked when I saw that, because I have no recollection of us having received the letter.
How did the hepatitis C infection impact upon the arrangements for something like dental care?
That's something that's come up all week, various people. After, I think it was 1999, Richard had developed diabetes, so we had to watch his food intake, blood sugar. Over the years with dental care, sometimes he struggled even to get dental appointments. They kept putting off appointments, or he had to keep asking for appointments. And when he went, he would have to sit and be the last patient, as other people have said, to go in at the end of the day. You feel like you're so contagious, nobody wants to touch you, So you had to sit, you went up in the morning, you sat all day waiting to have your appointment, and that happened with lots of clinics he eventually had to go to up at the hospital. He was left to last. And then, as everyone says, everything's gowned, everyone's gowned up, everything's covered, and that wasn't nice. That's makes you feel, I don't know, affects your self-esteem or what it is. It has an effect on you. And
you've referred to the treatments Richard embarked upon. He had interferon ribavirin. What were the side effects of that for him?
It had made him much more ill, and I think the first of those treatments, was meant to be for 6 months. I think they had to stop it very quickly after 2 or 3 months. I'm not sure if that's the one. There was one of the treatments. He had been a mild haemophiliac, but they discovered when they did some tests that he was in danger of having a serious bleed. I think, as one person said to him, he suddenly had become a severe haemophiliac. So they had to stop that immediately. He was in danger of having a bleed. Generally, any treatment he tried, and he tried so hard to stick with it, he was miserable. His quality of life, he just had to force himself to try and stay on the treatments. The trouble was, when he went to see doctors, he was a man that understated how he was feeling. He felt he had to put the extra effort in to stick with the treatments, that they were doing their best for him. But he was miserable at home. It made him feel so ill. He was just so cold all the time. He had to keep going to bed. We had to try and make light of it in front of the kids as they were growing up, so they wouldn't worry. It was a way of life almost. You adapt, and it's only years later you think that wasn't a normal life. But he suffered quite a lot with the treatments.
We've got a couple of letters Richard wrote to the GP from around this time, very understated, as you say. Yeah. If we look first at 2655005, this is a letter from Richard dated the 14th of February 2005, and he says this: Dear Dr. Kennedy, I've been encouraged by the staff at the liver clinic at the RVH to take a few weeks off work as the side effects of my current interferon ribavirin treatment are making it difficult for me to meet my work commitments. I'm keen to keep working for as long as possible, because if the treatment proves effective, they will decide this in the next few weeks, I could be on it until next winter and may well need extended leave later on. And then he sets out in the following paragraph some of the symptoms and the advice he'd been given. They suggest I get some sort of stomach drug to deal with the nausea I'm suffering. They feel I would benefit for an antidepressant. I am feeling emotionally unstable at times. I'm still having problems with my left shoulder, which is affecting my sleep pattern. While this is not a major problem in itself, it is a nuisance on top of the shivering, headaches, nausea, skin irritation. And then if we have the second letter from Richard's records, 2655004, this is a letter early the following year, 15th of January 2006, again from Richard to the GP. I've been feeling below par since before Christmas as a result of the effects of the Hep C virus. I had hoped that the Christmas break would have led to my batteries being recharged, but I returned to school on the 3rd of January still feeling extremely tired and cold. As well as this, I was also suffering from headaches, night sweats and muscle aches, all symptoms I suffer from when I do not get adequate rest. And then he goes on to say he'd been finding it difficult to keep his diabetes under control. And then in the next paragraph, writes reluctantly for some time off work. Is that very typical of how Richard would express himself?
Yes, and by that stage, our sons were becoming quite aware that things were not good, and we were trying to protect them from knowing or worrying about the future. So we tried to make light of it and not, I don't know, maybe some people say you're not being honest, but I think there's only so much pressure children growing up should have. And he didn't want them worrying, and they weren't stupid, they were clever kids, and they would be worried if he started taking long periods off work because he didn't know what the future held. It was killing him to stay at work, but he felt he had to keep going in case further down the line, he needed more time. So it's just, he understood it so much normally, but mentally as well, to see his frame of mind. And even in school, I think sometimes the pupils would comment because you'd know to look at him. At times you could see maybe his pallor, or he just, from lack of sleep and fatigue, you knew to look at him, he wasn't feeling right. And he would try not to say things to other staff. Even some of the pupils that were very fond of him and would see him every day would pick up on it though and ask if he was okay. And you know, it was very hard to keep going.
You've explained how, as time went by, Richard developed more and more infections, complications. His liver was found to be cirrhotic.
Yes.
And you've described how you had years of him being in and out of hospital for treatments for the hepatitis C or for the various medical complications he suffered. In 2009, his liver had deteriorated to the extent that he was placed on the liver transplant list. Is that right?
We were called over. They had talked about it for a while, and then because of all the various health issues, and when you have the hepatitis C virus, it seems to accentuate everything else, and you're more likely to encourage other health problems like the diabetes, and he had a heart problem, and they realised as time went on, the irony of it is that just previously he'd been going to the gym regularly, trying to keep fit for the day in the future that he would hope eventually to have a liver transplant. He was trying to keep himself fit, to keep himself in as good a shape as possible, only to discover this was actually damaging his heart. He had a valve problem in his heart. So they decided he would probably need a joint operation. It had to be both together. So at Easter 2009, when we were off school, we were brought over for 2 or 3 weeks to London for an assessment. And it was as important to them that I was mentally in the right place to support my husband. I was being interviewed as well as Richard by the different members of the team. I think if I hadn't been strong enough, they wouldn't have gone ahead because it was such a major thing they were going to put him through. So it had to be the both of us together. So they put him on the transplant list, and that was fine. We were sent home. And that was quite worrying when we were there for 2 or 3 weeks with the boys because we hadn't thought we'd be even there that long. And I know they were very worried at home because we were there for a few weeks. We come back, and then approaching the summer, he was told they were taking him off the transplant list again, and that really scared him. They were worried about his decline in health. And they decided then in the summer, I think it was July, to bring him over to London again. They needed to assess him to see if he was fit to go back on the transplant list again, which they did. They sent him home, and when they sent him home, they meant he should go back home to the Royal Victoria Hospital, but they didn't tell us that, so he came back to his own home for the summer until we got a call one day. London and the Royal had a conference call on Fridays regarding people going on the list or whatever, and they discussed Richard and asked about him, thinking he was in the Royal waiting, and discovered that there'd been a bit of mix-up, and we got a call one day to say, Richard, get into the hospital now. We don't want you at home, we want you here. We're worried. So he was in there for about 3 months on the list waiting for the donor organ, and it seemed quite a long time we were waiting. We worried. It wasn't nice because every so often, the door of the ward he was in would be shut, and he got to know that when they came round and closed the door, someone hadn't made it, and they were being taken out in the coffin, and it was not nice when you're waiting for donor organ and weeks go through. Then other people were being flown off to London for transplant, and he got so low after nearly 3 months, it was getting to both of us. I think I broke down then anyway, and spoke to the sister and said, look, we feel like nothing's going to happen here. He's worried because he's in his 50s that maybe he will be bypassed for a younger person. So eventually it was the end of November when the donor organ became available.
So in November 2009, Richard transferred, having spent, as you say, about 3 months already in hospital in Belfast, was transferred to King's College Hospital in London for the transplant.
We were flown over in the middle of the night.
And he underwent 11 hours or so of surgery.
Yes.
And then he remained in King's College Hospital after that for a prolonged period. What can you tell us about that time?
We originally thought we would be there maybe 3-4 weeks. So you go off with your little suitcases, and for those 3 months when he was waiting for the organ, I would go to work with suitcases in the car, and every night I come home with suitcases by the front door, and you live like that, and you live with your phone. And if you set your phone somewhere, you don't see it, you panic because this is your lifeline waiting for the call. So we lived like that for 3 months. We went over and we arrived during the night, and then about 8:30 on the morning on the Tuesday, they decided to go ahead with the transplant, and they took him to theatre, and I was left sitting in a corridor. I was still sitting there 8 hours later. I had been introduced to a transplant coordinator at the time who was supposed to be my go-between, who would let me know how it was going and keep in touch with me. And I was introduced to her. I never saw her again. I was her first person to work with in that role, but I never saw her again. So 8 hours later, I was still sitting with our suitcases. At that stage, probably a mess, crying my eyes out, not knowing what was happening. Had he died on the table? Were they still operating? That was the scariest time. And that went on for hours. So eventually someone contacted the liver ward, and somebody came and brought me up to where there's a special room where I should have been. So after 11 hours, he was brought up to intensive care, but they couldn't get him to come round. He was out for many days. And during that period, because of the double operation, it was scary because the room he was in, I walked in the first day and the whole wall was covered in machines as all these things linked up to him. It was nothing like you even see in television. It was such a shock. They tried to bring him round, and after many days, one of the nurses, and I have to say the nursing staff on the liver intensive care unit are so good. They are absolutely brilliant. They're from all over the world. They were all so good. But the nurse he had at one stage said to me, I think maybe you should take his wedding ring off. And I got the impression he didn't think he was going to make it. Oh my God. Sorry.
That's all right. Some water.
He eventually did come round. But as I say, we ended up in and out of intensive care. He became so weak, he couldn't sit up on his own, he couldn't feed himself, he couldn't hold a spoon. He had all sorts of health issues. Being such a large man, it was problematic trying to get the bed long enough for him. He was 6'7" after all. He developed serious bed sores. He was absolutely miserable. After different periods, he would maybe be well enough to go back on the ward. He would no sooner be back on the ward that there would be some issue after 2-3 days, or some problem or infection, or he maybe just wasn't able to cope, or maybe just wasn't getting the right attention, and I would have to flag it up with somebody, or maybe go and see a doctor in the intensive care unit and say, look, something's not right here, he's not getting enough attention, he's going downhill again. So we were constantly in and out of the intensive care unit. I felt like a snitch, but I was always having to raise an alarm about things. In those 4 months, I lived at a bedsit at the gates of the hospital, and I tried to keep myself fit by walking every morning, and I would go in at 1 o'clock, and I would be there. And some nights, Richard ended up having problems. He started hallucinating quite badly. On one occasion, I got a call about 2:30 in the morning from the doctors in the intensive care unit to please come in. And this was nearly breaking their own rules because they were very strict, and they wouldn't normally call somebody in. When I went in that night, 3 doctors were sitting at the glass cubicles. They had closed the doors, and there were 3 doctors on a bench sitting against the doors. And that raised alarm bells. Now, when he had been hallucinating, or before he was hallucinating, he was extremely weak. And it was in one of those periods, as I said, he couldn't feed himself, he couldn't lift his arm, there was no muscle, no flesh. And I don't know what way hallucinations work, how adrenaline works, but I got the impression he had taken a swing at one of the doctors who'd become violent, and this was just so out of character for him, being such a gentle man. And they were so good, they didn't say anything. They wouldn't answer me when I tried to clarify what had happened. So they had me come in and sit with him, and every so often they'd open the door a crack to check I was okay. So I stayed with him the rest of the night to see if I could calm him down. And those were scary situations because they lasted for hours. He would imagine things on the walls. He imagined people were attacking him. He wanted me to call the police. Those episodes reoccurred throughout the months. And they were very upsetting because even the way he spoke to me, or he could almost become violent, and this was just so not him. And it wasn't him. He didn't know he was like this. But they would have to intubate him again, and because he was in danger of hurting himself, or he would maybe try and get out of the bed. And if somebody of that height fell out of the bed, that would be serious. So they were concerned then that the number of times they were having to put him under again, if you like. On one occasion, one of the consultants brought me into a room and sat me down and said, right, Sharon, we have issues here. This is a very unusual situation we have with your husband, but you need to be warned that in the future, he has been anaesthetised or intubated so often. He said this will eventually, most likely, cause a problem with his brain eventually, and it'll manifest itself in some way in the future. This is really bad for someone to have to be intubated so much. So at the time I listened and that was fine, didn't think of it again till later on. But we just, on those 4 months, I think I flew home twice, just for a day each time, because you suddenly realise you're in this little world away from home, and I suddenly thought, okay, there's bills need paid, there's things you pay once a year, and I suddenly panicked. And so I flew home 2 different occasions just for that. But apart from that, one of those occasions I come back to find him in his bed when he was in the normal ward, and his skin was actually, sorry, this doesn't sound very nice, it was all cracking and seemed to be blood seeping, and I'd only left him for 36 hours, and nobody seemed to have been in to check him or notice this, and it was so scary. So I had to again raise the alarm, and we were back in intensive care again. And even the nurses in that intensive care unit, it was all, they couldn't believe it, how often, they got to know us so well because we were in so much, and they couldn't believe the number of times you had to keep coming back. Another occasion, when the nurse was doing the handover for us to go back on the ward again, unfortunately the nurse that came up to meet us and bring us down, and his English was not good. The nurse was explaining Richard's situation and medication and different details before she did the handover, and he just looked at her blankly, and she got worried, and she said, are you understanding what I'm telling you? She needed him to respond, and he just shrugged. And she was at a situation she didn't know whether she should hand over and let him go to the ward or not. She did. We were back, I think, within 48 hours. And she got really upset. I had to raise the alarm because he wasn't being looked after in the ward, and a particular nurse had disappeared and wasn't appearing for, we couldn't get anyone to come sometimes. And I'd had to complain, and she was really upset. She felt she was to blame. And she wasn't to blame, but she felt bad because we were back in again.
And that was some 4 or 5 months that Richard spent post the transplant surgery itself in King's.
We were
with
there
you.
4 months, yes.
And then he returned to Northern Ireland, but again into hospital first of all rather than home.
Oh yes, we were flown. The consultants at the liver intensive care unit that talked to me about the hallucinations and the intubation and brain problems, they as good as said that they didn't think we would be going home still for months. They wanted to keep us much longer. And on one of the occasions when he was being moved on to the ward from that unit, they didn't have a free bed. The 2 wards they'd been using, there were no free beds. So we were moved to another ward further away. It was a different doctor in charge of that ward. He couldn't believe we'd been away from home for so long. And I think he was worried of the effect maybe it was having on me, because we've been there becoming institutionalised, I suppose, for so long. That particular doctor name escapes me. He decided to push for us to go home. He thought we should go home to hospital in Northern Ireland. Now, he didn't consult the liver unit. I don't think they were happy when they discovered. I think they knew, foresaw lots of problems cropping up, and looking back, they were right. We were flown home directly to the Royal Victoria Hospital. We were there for, I can't remember if it was a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks or what it was. Richard was so depressed. He still wasn't able to move. He had, in bed or anything. And then the kidneys started failing in London. And dialysis was mentioned, that was raising issues. So then he was moved to the City Hospital because of the dialysis he needed. So in total, we were probably in the Royal City about 5.5 months.
You've given us some information that expands upon what you've said in your witness statement about how, at this point, how Richard felt, becoming institutionalised, feeling very low. What would you like, if anything, to say about that? Or I can read any of it if you prefer.
He was very low. When we were in London, he got very low, and at times basically said, what is the point? Better if I just died, that sort of thing. And every so often you try and get him back to being positive. To me, how you think helps your health so much if you can. But in his situation, that was very hard, I know. When he came back, somebody in the Royal mentioned, yes, he needs to be on antidepressants. He's very depressed. When we were there the first couple of weeks, this woman came to see us. I knew nothing about her coming. I don't know if she was a psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever. And she walked into the room one day and she said, right, I'm here. She said, Richard, how much do you remember of your time in London, of the 4 months you were there? And Richard had said to me, gosh, were we there 4 months? I feel like we were only there, a couple of weeks or something. He couldn't remember most of what had happened. He'd been so ill. And she decided, she came in and said, right, I think you should be told, you should know, it's your right to know those missing periods in your life. I'm sure you want to know what this missing blanks. And I was just horrified because I just knew it had been hell. It had been so traumatic. I couldn't believe this. She wanted him to know these things. And I knew he'd be so upset. And sometimes after some of the hallucinations, if he didn't understand what had been happening, he couldn't believe what anybody was trying to explain to him. So as soon as she started asking me and quizzing and trying to discuss this, I was getting really upset because maybe I was so traumatised from it. And I hadn't talked to anyone about it. And he said, I don't want to know this. I can't deal with it. He was finding it hard to deal with his life as it was. Sorry.
It's all right. There's no need to apologise.
He was finding it put up with so long and having been in hospital so long and not feeling that there was anything positive around the corner. He'd been through a massive thing having this transplant, and yet we'd watched other people, in London after a few weeks getting better and walking and being happy and eventually going home. And he was still there. He was still in hospital. He was still really ill. He felt worse than he'd had ever. And he didn't see any hope. So eventually that particular day, I couldn't deal with it. And I had to say to her to leave. We can't do this. We haven't been asked about this. It hasn't been discussed if we want to do this. We can't deal with it. And he saw what it was doing to me. I went to the city and I gather he was very low and they must have decided he needed to speak to somebody. And again, he voiced this doctor in the city. He was discussing his mental state and how he was feeling, how low he was. And he really didn't see what the point was anymore. He didn't feel he was getting better. There was always some health issue after another. When we were there, he couldn't physically walk. He could barely sit in a wheelchair. He just couldn't do anything for himself. And after such a long period of time like that, he really had given up. He, I think, had suicidal thoughts. He voiced this to a psychiatrist. And he just said to him, I wish that something would happen in my health. I think think he just wanted something would happen suddenly and that would be him. He would die. He just couldn't take many more. We found when we went, we had to go up to try and have a lot of physio because he couldn't even sit up in the chair himself. So regularly I would bring him up to the physio department, and the physiotherapist and myself would try and coax, cajole, bully, encourage, try and get him to work with us. Even just getting him to do simple exercises. Some days he would refuse. He just didn't see the point. Sorry.
There came a point, Sharon, in the summer of 2010 when Richard came back home.
Yes, after the Royal in the City, he was moved to, first of all, there was a big meeting about him coming home. And again, he was very low. What the plan was to move him to our local community hospital in Newton Arch, where we live. And that was like an in-between. He would be there for a couple of weeks and then come up to the house. And the meeting was in the main hospital in Belfast first. And we were called into a room. And when we went into this room, it was full of various people from all sorts of departments. I was quite shocked. Because it wasn't a very big room, and it didn't help the fact he was in a wheelchair and he could barely sit up. Trying to get into the room, there was no space to get the wheelchair, and he felt like he was in the way. This upset him. There was loads of people there, all sorts of healthcare professionals, plus staff from the hospital. And it was to have a discussion about him going home and what sort of care package could be put in place for him. And for such a proud man, he broke down. He couldn't believe this was taking place. And he couldn't see himself ever getting any better. And the fact he was in pain sitting upright in the wheelchair when he was there. He was begging to be taken out to lie down again. So I was so scared because I didn't know how I was going to look after him at home because he was so weak. So this is a discussion we had, and arrangements were put in place. We went to the community hospital for 2-3 weeks. And I would go and would try and take him outside for fresh air and in the wheelchair. He was actually terrified because he'd been in hospital for almost a year. He was actually scared, really scared, coming home. He just didn't know how he would be. He didn't know how well he would get. I suppose he was worried how his sons would see him like that because he had been such a big, strong man originally. So all sorts of thoughts were in his head, and it was exhausting and scary, and trying to be positive for him and encourage him, and every day trying to take him out in the wheelchair, even though he was, by that stage he was like a skeleton with skin on. That's all I can describe him. He had no flesh left, he had no muscle, he was so gaunt, it was scary. But at 6'7", I found it very hard pushing him in a wheelchair. It was still difficult. And just before he came home, then we had a special bed put in the house. We didn't have a spare room. I took out the big kitchen table and we set up part of the room there. And he had a special bed installed, and a care package was put in place for him.
You'd have carers in to help wash and dress and help him eat.
Well, he was a bit stubborn there. His pride, he didn't want these strangers coming in and people having to do things like that. It's very personal. Your dignity goes out the window. And even though he'd been ill, he still wanted his dignity, and that's natural. So the gentleman who ran the care company, he was a very nice man. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. He was very good. He offered to come in. He would be the one who would come in 3 days a week. Richard had to go for dialysis from then onwards. But it was a very early start. So that gentleman said he would do the early morning shift. He would come in and help him dress and help him get ready. And Richard didn't want me stopping work. So he did that. Some of the other carers, and they were lovely, but they were females, and he didn't want them doing personal things with him. I was doing that. So they would come in at lunchtime or the evenings to see if he was okay, or give him a cup of tea, and I would leave the food for him. But he tried to stop that as soon as he could. He was just proud and independent and didn't want strangers working with him, really. He wanted to be independent, but I knew it was impossible for him at that stage.
Sometime the following summer, 2011, there was discussion about a second transplant operation, and yes. You returned to King's for a period of time. What happened? It
was quite short notice when they asked him to come over, so I was not able to go over with him. It was a difficult situation. I felt so guilty over the time because I felt I'd neglected our sons, and they'd been left looking after themselves through the previous period. All the time we'd been in hospitals, I just couldn't be in two places at once, and I had so much to focus on with him, but I felt so guilty. My younger son had struggled very much. Well, they both struggled when we were in London because they were trying to keep going, but when he was called for the second transplant, at least one of my sons was at home at the time, and I was worried about how he was feeling about everything, and they were expected, Richard only to be there a short time. There was nowhere for me to stay, there wasn't a free bedsit available, so he went ahead and went over, and I don't think he was there too long. During that period, I think it coincided with our younger son receiving his Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award. So we made arrangements with the hospital to let Richard come out for an afternoon to see his son getting that at St James's Palace. That was very difficult. He had a photograph taken with his son afterwards, and in it he's standing behind me. He didn't want anyone to see him because he developed a massive hernia, and he looked so gaunt and looked so ill. And he was standing with his head to hold a stick and was barely able to stand any time for the photograph. They had to get him from the hospital in a taxi to St James's Palace to see this, and really took it out of him and get him back to the hospital again. So it was a very difficult time, and it upset his son. It was important his dad be there, but it hurt him seeing his dad so frail. But he came back, and the decision was, unfortunately, that he was too ill. Sorry.
You've explained in your statement that the decision that was communicated was that there was nothing more that could be done.
It was too risky. The chances of him surviving were so low. So you come home, and how do you tell your children? Sorry. How do you tell your children that? It's just devastating. And throughout everything, even in London, even when the boys were, one was just started working and one was at university, and the whole time we were in London, and were constantly ringing me, and they kept saying, "Oh, but he is going to pull through. He is going to get through this." And you can't promise something you can't carry through. So I'd never make promises. I would just be probably vague or evasive and hope and pray that the next phone call I would have something positive to say. So to tell them that, no, there's nothing more, your dad's going to die, and I'm watching that happening and waiting and wondering when that'll happen, it's devastating for me, but to see your children, no matter what age they are, having to watch that and know it's inevitable, that's not something you wish for anybody.
And in October of that year, October 2011, Richard was back in hospital. You've described in your statement he was jaundiced, he was withdrawn, and he'd lost the will to live. And you've said you spent about 6 weeks trying to get him to want to live.
When he first went in, we understood it was just a procedure that would be in, normally people would be in 3 or 4 days, but I knew with his complicated health issues, it might take slightly longer. And he said, oh, maybe I'll get out such a day. And I said, well, Richard, maybe you might be in probably a full week, maybe at weekends, certain days. They don't, you're not sent home. And then after the first few days I went in, suddenly one day he just turned yellow. And it was just a shock. It just seemed to be overnight. And he closed down. He wouldn't speak to me. He had shut down. He just had given up completely. And he was so low looking. And there was no fighting him. He just lost the will completely. And it was so hard to try and work with him. And at times, sometimes dialysis, maybe I would be told, oh, he didn't have dialysis, maybe the day he was due to have it, and oh, he'll have it tomorrow. And then I'd be ringing the hospital and saying, has he had it? And I couldn't understand what was happening. And I think they knew that he was going downhill, but I was still fighting. He has to have a dialysis. I wanted things to keep going. I wasn't prepared to give up on him then.
You've described in written material you've given to the inquiry the last few days of Richard's life and your son's coming to the hospital. It's entirely a matter for you as to whether you'd like to say anything about that now.
At one stage in the hospital, one of the consultants and senior doctors and sister or whatever called me in and said, right, we need a discussion here. And I think it was because I'd been checking up. Had he had dialysis? Had he had this or that? And they sat me down and said that I had to accept and stop fighting for him. I had to accept that there was nothing more could be done. I had to let him go. And I was going to have to make the phone call and to fly my sons home as quickly as possible, because I didn't know, once everything stopped, how long he would have. That's a very hard discussion, and it's very hard to accept. So I phoned my sons and got them home as quickly as possible. The first morning then, they were both home. We went up to see Richard so that they could spend time with him, and as soon as we walked in, he just wasn't himself, and he started shouting at us and basically shouting, let me die, what are you doing, let me die, I don't want to be here. To be shouting that at your sons and they want to go up and see you, that was heartbreaking. And I know he wasn't himself, and mentally he wasn't in the right good place. But I always wish that hadn't happened. They sat, eventually everyone got him calmed down and we stayed with them, but it was breaking their hearts. So after some hours, I had to ring a relative to bring them home for a while. They couldn't take it anymore. They needed to go back home. So I stayed each day, and they actually thought that possibly he would pass away hours later that evening, but he didn't. It was a few days later. So each day I would sit with them, and the next day I went in, and the boys were going to come in later on that afternoon, and a friend was going to bring them. And I was glad they weren't with me, because as soon as I walked in again, Richard was in bed, and as soon as he saw me, again started shouting at me, what are you doing to me, begged me to kill him. And to say that in words was just horrific. It's not what you expect to hear. Just wanted to die. He had had enough. And he was so distressed. I had to speak to the staff, and they had to give him something to sedate him. They couldn't let him go on like that. So after that, I don't know what he knew. I just sat with him for days. Talked to him. Just waiting for him to die. Sorry.
And Richard died on the 28th of November 2011. Chronic renal failure with cirrhosis secondary to hepatitis C is the cause of Richard's death.
Sorry?
Chronic renal failure with cirrhosis secondary to hepatitis C is the medical cause of death. Can I just ask a little about the impact Richard's death has had on you and your sons subsequently?
Big impact. We're a very close family. The boys loved their dad. They looked up to him. They enjoyed great chats with him about everything in life, including what they were doing. And the younger boy struggled. He went back to university and struggled. It wasn't in the right place. So the university said, look, just go home, take a break. He had to come home and take a break. But he was such a big person, even physically, this big man of 6'7". There was a massive gap. You really do miss him. Still miss him. But they still struggle with it. We have various times. It's the simplest things. You go and buy a birthday card for somebody, all you see is cards for father, husband. Even now, I hate things like that. You see couples walking around hand in hand. I miss them. We used to hold hands all the time. The boys, they used to do jiu-jitsu, swimming. We would take them to various things. One of them said to me lately, Mum, he said, when I go swimming at the pool, they were part of the local swimming club and took part in galas and such like and helped with coaching. In England, one son said, the galas or the training early in the morning when he would go swimming, the kids would be training, the parents watching them. He said that just gets to him every time because he remembers us being there. And they see family units. And it's like taking photographs, even recently, if we've done anything together. There's 3 of us in the photograph. There should be 4. There should be 4. He shouldn't have lost out on that. When the older son graduated, Richard was in hospital. He was too ill to be able to go. And we missed him so much because he wasn't able to see his first son graduate. When the second son graduated, a couple of years after that, then Richard passed away. And that was very hard for my son. And 2 or 3 of his friends from university, a couple flew from quite far away to support us because they knew that the younger son was struggling, his dad not being there to see him graduate. It's any special events. It's the boys being able to tell their dad anything that's happening, anything important. Family weddings are hard because he's not there with me at those events. I just find it incredibly lonely without him. Friends are great at the time and support you, but everyone's busy with their lives, everyone's doing their own thing and moving on. So I haven't been able to do that. The phase of our life, all the things you plan to do when your children leave home, that doesn't happen now. That's gone. I have to keep working now. I can't afford to stop work. It's just life is very different.
Richard had to eventually and reluctantly give up the career he loved as a teacher.
Yes, very suddenly.
He'd become vice principal but wasn't able to make even a full year in that role.
That's right, because we went for the assessment at the Easter time and they were shocked he'd still managed to keep working. That spoke a lot about Richard, and he was ordered, sorry, you go back, you do not go back to work. And that was a shock to somebody who is such a proud man, who enjoyed his work and was great with the kids in school. They loved him. He inspired so many of them in different ways. After the transplant, before his health went down the hill again, he wanted to feel of use, so he contacted schools and promoted organ donation and spoke to sixth form pupils in various schools, and the response he got was brilliant. He was asked back, and so many of the kids came and spoke to him afterwards about organ donation, and he had to feel he was still of use.
You'd had to change your career plans entirely due to Richard's ill health earlier, is that right?
I used to be a textile designer. I was contracted out. I worked design firm. I used to work freelance down south, and I worked for a company up in Northern Ireland. And then when we started a family, I did freelance work again, and I enjoyed it because it was well paid and I could work around the kids and such like. And then one of the first times he was unwell, I don't remember which one it was, and he panicked, he got scared, and he was worrying about the future, how long he could work for, or if he would have to take breaks from work. And he said to me, asked me to change what I was doing, and somebody at one of the schools we worked in then asked me to come in and help out on an occasion, and then a job became available, and he asked me would I go for that, because it was much less pay, but it was a normal 9 to 5 or 9 to 4 job. If you have a mortgage companies are well known for not being very appreciative if you're freelance, no matter how much you're earning, they like a steady salary, So I changed careers then, and
in terms of such financial assistance as there was forthcoming from the Skipton Fund, and Richard regarded and the way you put it in your statement, the value placed on human life as insulting and demeaning.
Yes, it got him down. He just thought if that's sort of value for life, that's just, it made him sad that if that's all it's worth,
And after Richard's death, you received a single one-off payment of £10,000, and the only ongoing payment you receive is in relation to fuel and heating allowance.
Yes, the letter that came offering the amount of 10,000, the tone of the letter, I think, really upset me. Partly angered me, but upset me, because it intimated that this was the only offer on the table. There was normally nothing in the future, and I have no opportunity to fight this or ask for anything else, and it was a case of take it or leave it, that's it. And once you've taken it, that's it. We've nothing more to do with you type thing. That's as if to say, well, your husband's dead now, go away and move on. It was just, and I took it. I mean, I needed it. I was desperate. But it was just the tone of the letter that came with it upset me, that there was no support, nothing.
Was any counselling or psychological support ever made available to you during everything
Never.
you've described?
And all the time we were in hospital, never. All that time in London and then coming home. And when we come back from London, I think I was quite despairing at times, because simple things, even every single day of my life, for all that time, I was spending so many hours in hospitals. And when I come back here, and then travelling up to the city hospital, and someone said, oh, because he's a long-term patient, and even when the visiting had set visiting hours at that occasion, quite often the staff were happy for me to stay on to help him or try and help feed him, so I would be there for very long periods late into the night. Car parking was costing me pounds and pounds. I just couldn't afford every day. And I went to ask to see if there was help, and they said, oh, he doesn't have cancer. No. And someone else said, but you have to get help here, because he's such a long-term patient and you're here for so long every day. And I was passed from pillar to post, and no, he hasn't got cancer. No, go away type thing. And there was no help, no support, no counselling, no nothing.
You've given us a picture of Richard before his health deteriorated as drastically as you've described to display, so we'll have a look at that picture. When was that taken?
That was taken in 2007. Before my elder son, on the right of the picture, they were due to leave an hour later to take the boat over to Scotland and then drive down to Liverpool for my son to start university. And after that, his health started to, it was much more noticeable, and he didn't enjoy having photographs taken much after that. He was fit to do that, but the following years, if my son was, for instance, a year later when they moved maybe from the halls of residence to a flat or something and they needed help, the following year, Richard drove over. We went over in the boat and drove down, but my other son had to go with him to do anything physical. Richard literally could barely get out of the car. He was struggling. A year later, started to struggle. So he couldn't actually physically help my son move house. He brought the other son to do that. So it kicked in really just after that, and he was never then. That's where we felt guilty, because the younger son never got that support or help when he went to university, and he found that extremely hard leading up to the time when he was leaving school, and when he went to university, it really hurt him. He really missed us, you know.
And you talked about how Richard had loved being a teacher.
Yes.
And that love was reciprocated at his funeral, I think.
Yes, the church was overflowing. They were actually, I think, late starting the service. And I turned around at one point and the queue was out the church, down the street, into the town. It was wonderful, but it was overwhelming. We had a book for people to write comments in. And what was amazing, and it was lovely, the school that I had moved to, a group of my sixth form pupils came and gave a guard of honour for the coffin for me. So they were there to support me. But pupils we had known at our last school, going back many years, some of them were, married themselves by now, and groups of them, so many came when they had heard through, I suppose, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, when they'd got news and word had got out that he had died. And they just loved him so much. So there were so many pupils from going back years there and they wrote lovely things about him. And I only looked at that book of condolence last night. You've given us
a photo of an extract from the Book of Condolence, and we'll just show that. You could turn it round, please, Paul. Sharon, for those who can't read it, would you like me to read out the words?
Yeah, please.
A great big man that always put a smile on your face. Such an amazing and lovely person. You taught me so much and have inspired me. I just wish I can be as great a teacher as you. I am so lucky to have known Mr. Lowry. Inspirational, caring, thoughtful are just a few words. Thank you for believing in me and encouraging me. Maybe now I can become even half the teacher you were. What a wonderful man. You could be having the worst days, and Richard would know what to say to cheer you up. Will always be missed.
I just feel that describes his character.
Sharon, that's the end of the questions I wanted to ask you. Is there anything else you want to say?
If you can bear with me just a minute or two. Just to say, sorry if I repeat myself, just my lovely big husband, he was 6'7", and he was known affectionately as the big man by so many people. He was also described by many as a true gentleman. That was something that was repeated so often by people. He was a gentle giant, so well thought of, liked by everyone who knew and worked with him. He had a great sense of humour, and I miss that so much every day. It is 7.5 years since Richard lost his fight for life, and it still feels like just months. You learn to live with and hide your emotions, but inside I feel incredible sadness and hurt that we were robbed of the life together that we thought we would have had and should have had. I found it difficult to open up and write both this and my statement. Having spent so long supporting my husband, I was determined to stay strong and help him get through everything. In doing so, I shut down my emotions as best I could. Both our sons miss their dad. Every milestone in their lives they want to share with them. Just being able to talk to him. Sometime in the future, my sons will get married, and the three of us are going to struggle immeasurably with the fact that our big man is not going to be there to share those special times with us. I would like to thank Sir Brian for bringing this inquiry to Belfast and giving us the opportunity to be heard. I desperately hope that there's a positive outcome from this inquiry, that the government accept responsibility and liability for something that should never, ever have happened. Sadly, I feel as if I'm having to prove that my husband's life was important enough to matter. I consider it shameful that this scandal has dragged on for so long and caused so much pain and grief to all those infected and affected. Richard was not only my husband, he was a special dad to our two sons. He was my best friend, soulmate, who I will always love and miss. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much. We'll take a break till 12:10.
Thank you, sir.
Slightly shorter break than usual.